every word has weight
Yeah.
when it comes to leadership, but specifically in the pastoral world. Like, what would you tell every pastor when it comes to the topic of church hurt?
When it comes to any kind of hurt, I mean, this is true in our own relationships and friendships as well, that it's not our perception of whether something should have hurt or should not have hurt, right? It's if someone feels hurt by something, that needs to be acknowledged and dealt with, regardless of whether we think, it was something, if it would have hurt us or what our intentions were.
Have you ever been hurt by somebody who attends the church? Church hurt is a very real thing. I've been there, and God's heart for you is that he loves you, he cares for you, and there's hope, there's health, there's help, and there's healing. And we talk on today's Young Adults Today podcast episode about church hurt, about rediscovering faith, and about really the evangelical church with Karen Swallow Pryor. She's our guest. I'm Josiah Kennealy. In just a second, my wife Micah and I sit for an amazing conversation like we do every Monday. And welcome to the Young Adults Today podcast. Fam, it's great to have you here. Thrilled to have you a part of this community of leaders who are fanatical about reaching young adults for Christ, about training leaders to start and strengthen young adult ministries in our world today. We drop new episodes every Monday, so get in the rhythm in 2025. Make this a part of your weekly digest and dose of leadership. Really excited for today's conversation. But on Mondays, we unpack really conversations about the faith of the next generation with apologists like Lee Strobel, generational researchers like the Barna Group. We also talk with pastors, authors, cultural experts, and thought leaders. And man, if you have a question that we should talk about, a guest to suggest, we're open to the feedback. And we hope you follow Young Adults Today on Instagram, join the Facebook group. Those links are in the show description. And one quick thing, we just had a March Leaders Conference. Annually, leaders from over 10 states and Canada gather together in Minneapolis, Minnesota to grow together as leaders. Check out this highlight video. Today's episode is brought to you by our sponsors at Scripture Music. Scripture Music is using AI and other tools to set music to the Bible and to share it around the world. It's a brand new startup project, and if you think it's interesting or worthwhile, thanks for checking it out and sharing it. Listeners help this project grow. The easiest way to find it for free is on all major streaming platforms through the link in this podcast episode description.
I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him.
Be sure you check out Scripture Music. Well, save the dates for March 2026 and get in the room. We also have an upcoming event in Irvine, California, June 5th and 6th called the West Coast Young Adults Today Leader Conference. We'd love to have you grow deeper in this community. And until then, please enjoy today's conversation with Karen Swallow Pryor right here on Young Adults Today.
Well, happy Monday, everybody. This is the Young Adults Today podcast. I'm Micah Kennealy.
I'm Josiah Kennealy. We're your hosts. We're joined today by Dr. Karen Swallow Pryor. How are you?
I'm a little cold today here on this January day, but I'm inside, so I can't complain, but I miss summer already.
Me too.
You know what? We're praying that maybe the listener might be somewhere warm, maybe on vacation or living. But you know what? I will say this. Both Mike and I, we live in Minneapolis. We love the 4 distinct seasons, and there's just so much there. Do you have a favorite season?
Yeah, I mean, I do live in Virginia and I love the fact that we have four seasons. But summer and spring and fall are my favorite. So
I thought you
all
were
of
gonna
them.
say my four favorite seasons are summer, 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 and summer.
I love it. Well, we're just gonna have some fun today. And for those of us who may not know you, Karen, would you share a little bit about your story, what you're doing, what God's been teaching you, maybe, and just a brief synopsis of how you got to where you are today?
Well, I am currently a writer and speaker. Um, for about 25 years, I was an English professor serving in Christian schools and universities. So I've always loved books. That's where my writing comes from. And I transitioned over the past year into full-time writing and speaking. And so
Wow.
that's been kind of an adventure. Actually, I should clarify, I don't really think of myself as a speaker. I don't necessarily seek that out. But when you are a writer and people read your books and they like them, hopefully they want you to come and speak about them. So I do that. But my preferred activity is just hiding away at home with a good book or writing something. And yeah, yeah. So,
Amazing. Where did the passion for writing, when did that start? Where did it come from?
well, my real passion is words and language, and reading is my first passion. I just fell in love with reading as a little girl, and ended up majoring in English, becoming an English professor, and writing flowed out of that. Writing flows out of my teaching. I often just like to, put down on paper the things that I've learned, things that I've taught to my students. I write a lot about literature. My next book is actually on vocation and calling because I've, had a lot of conversations about that with students over the years and even experienced questions and in my own life about vocation and calling. And so that's how my writing comes out of life and my wide reading.
I love that. I think it's beautiful. I think Josiah, he's an avid reader.
For sure.
I would rather listen to podcasts. I'm just a slow reader. I think that's my problem. Is like I want to zip through a book. And some older woman in my life at the time, she's like, just learn how to speed read. And she would go through like a 300-page book in a day. I'm like, but I would miss every detail. Like I want to paint the picture in my mind. So my mind and my eyes and my words aren't always flowing at the pace I wish they did. But I do enjoy a good book. Um, we love talking about the next generation and we love talking about young adults. I mean, you've been in the education world.
For sure.
They're asking questions. They're asking questions about what should I do? Where do I go? How do I know what I'm passionate about? And we get to do that in probably a little bit of a different way, maybe not so much in the academic world like you did for 25 years, but we are in the pastoral world a little bit. And Josiah teaches an adjunct class, so a little bit in the education, not a crazy amount. But what we really realize is young adults, they're seeking, they're searching, they want truth, they want purpose in that. So we'd love to ask every young adult young adults today guest, why do you believe, or what's like your perspective of why is reaching the next generation so vital in our day and age?
Well, it's vital in every day and age because they are, as your phrase suggests, the next generation. I think that in this sort of late modern world, it's even more important because one of the qualities of modernity is that it goes faster and faster, and we do tend to look and rely more on younger people at earlier ages. I mean, that's good and bad, but we don't necessarily value the wisdom of sages and our elderly as much as in generations past we should. And so we look to the younger generations. And so informing them, we actually do help form how not only we think about them, but how we think about generations past. And so pouring into their lives is a way of helping to shape what the future will look like. I mean, it's what else are we going to do? Because none of us are going to be here,
Mhm.
in centuries from now. And so what we do now has an effect forever and ever into the future.
My gosh. I really think that what you said is so powerful and profound. And our daughters, they're 4 and 3, and like we've done this activity before, but last week they were begging all week to go to the library. And then I think it's probably later this afternoon, we're going to try to go and return some books and pick up some books. But it was like we share a passion, I think, with you of learning,
Mhm.
of reading, of writing, and even like I think there's such power to something that you said at the top of the episode is spoken word, written word, like whether it's words spoken over you by a family member and whether they were words of uplifting and encouragement or tearing down, like there's some words, there's probably been things that every listener has heard that have hurt or it's been hard to unhear. And
Mhm.
then sometimes there's just a way to pass on words, pass on learning, pass on God's word, the faith, just also other great writing and things like that. Do you have thoughts on longevity in leading the next generation, whether it's on the college campus, whether it's in a local church? What we're seeing, Karen, is like if you're leading a young adult ministry back to back years, like 2 years in a row, you're like a veteran just because there's such, even in leaders, a launch, relaunch, you get asked to leave, you get asked to get a promotion, take on a campus or a different role. Like, do you have thoughts on longevity and
Mhm.
staying a while, unpacking your bags,
Mhm.
and just,
Mhm.
yeah, sticking with it?
I have a lot of thoughts on that actually. And working with young people, whether it's in church ministry or in higher education, as I did, it's inherent in that kind of work that that things are going to change quickly. You develop relationship with students who then 4 years later like graduate, right? And they go away. Like, what is up with that? I don't know why they do that. They leave. And so then the next ones come in. And so we are constantly dealing with change in this kind of ministry. And so I think in knowing that and accepting that, we have to be more intentional and conscious and aware of our need to, as you said, sort of unpack your bags. I actually have a section in my forthcoming book on vocation and calling that talks about how important it is to, and not in every case, but how we underestimate the power of just staying, and and being in one place for a while, whether that's someplace that we live or someplace that we work. Now, of course, this is no excuse to say no to something that we know we should do, or to put up with abusive situations. I'm not talking about that, but just the goodness and value of staying in one place. I relate in the book how my husband is a public school teacher, and he's coming up on 20 years there. And
Oh
one
my
of the things
gosh.
he notices, yeah, he notices that like a lot of the teachers have been there for a long time, but oftentimes the administrators come and go, and they climb up the ladder or go over here, and they always want to come in and make a lot of changes, and they shake everything up and then they move on. And the teachers are just kind of there day in, day out, year in, year out, doing the work, and providing the stability and the roots. And I think that we just live in a culture that doesn't see the value and the fruit that can come from just doing something for a long time and being in a place for a long time. Now, again, there are often good reasons not to do that, but we often just don't even realize that staying in itself is a good.
I think that's so good. I think one thing that Josiah and I, when we said yes to what God had been calling us to, was reaching young adults and equipping leaders. And it's like we began thinking of the end in mind. Like at the end of our life, what
Mm.
do we want to have said? Like, what do we want to have God to been able to accomplish in and through anything that He put before us? Like, and I think when we start, I mean, like when I start thinking about the end in mind, I want to be somebody that's considered you're consistent, like you're solid. Like when I call you, you answer. When you text, you're there. When we get something on the calendar, you show up. And I think that that is a generation that is actually the heart's cries to be known and to be loved and to be seen. That's every human's heart cry. And to really realize like when we as leaders or professors or whatever role we may be in, when we provide consistency, people feel more comfortable. And there's like, I mean, I could go back to my hometown 20 years later. I'm like, oh, they're still there. Like, there's this like this comforting feeling. I'm like, I come from a small town. So it's like when you have those comforting feelings, and you see people being consistent and they're rooted, you are able to see the fruit of their labor. You are able to see what God has done. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things that we've seen. And one of the biggest things that young adults are asking us is like, how do you decipher and determine the calling or the voice of God or the will of God? And they're trying to navigate all those, intersections of life because it's so fast and so quickly evolving, and that door is just spinning so quickly. What do you wish that every young adult knew when it came to vocation and calling?
Hmm. Well, again, I don't think we even talked about this because we set up this podcast quite a ways back, and I was still working on my book, and now it's finished. It'll be coming out later this year. But this is exactly what I talk about in my book, so I'm so excited that you're asking these questions, because there are actually a lot of things to kind of parse out. I'm a word person. Like English is my field, and so I love to think about the words and the definitions and what they mean and how they're different. One of the things that especially young people have an idea about, because we live in this social media saturated culture
Hmm.
and it distorts a lot of things. But one thing is passion. We have a whole generations that have been told to pursue their passion. And
Totally.
I say that's not necessarily a good, well, I actually say it's not good necessarily.
But I mean, everyone's saying that. That's what like
Everyone,
culture.
right. That's right, right. I mean, that we think, and so, I mean, of course, and I say this in the book, is that God does give us passions. And we also can cultivate our own desires and passions rightly or wrongly. And they are good, but the myth that has been put out there is that we're going to make a lot of money from our passion. And
There it is.
that is just simply, somebody out there in social media has certainly done that, and we get to see that played in front of us over and over every day. But that is the exception, not the rule. And I have actually talked to younger people, actually even older people in their 30s, who have been told that they are actually in sin because their work is not their passion. And they've been received counseling, like you're not in God's will because your work isn't your passion. And it's just like that, those two things are not the same. Like our work and our calling and our passion, sometimes they can be, but knowing that they are different helps. I mean, there are many people now and through the course of history who have pursued their passions on the weekends, right? Like, their hobbies, or there's the things that they just love to do and they aren't necessarily getting paid to. Or there are people who have pursued their passion at home without getting a paycheck, right? Because they just love, being a parent or working in the home, and maybe they don't make money doing that, but they support a household and they're not necessarily bringing in income. These things are all very different. And so if we can begin to make some of those distinctions, like what is passion, what is desire, what is purpose, what does the world need? What are my gifts and my skills? What are my abilities? Because sometimes people have passion for things that they are not good at. I have some of those. I'm not good at very much, but I have a lot of interest. And so knowing that those are all different can help us to realize that there is no right just by existing, that we're going to pursue something we love, be good at, and get paid a lot of money for it. But we can still do all those things. So the trick really is to hear what God is calling us to do, right? It might be something that, like Moses, we are not excited about doing.
Yeah, he's like
And
the
that
reluctant leader.
yeah. And he doesn't even feel like he has the gifts to do that. And so God does equip him. And so, but sometimes God does call us to do the things that we are gifted and passionate about. Again, they're not the same thing. And so we have to quiet all the noise out there, the social media, the TikToks that are sort of distorting our understanding of reality. Um, you know, Listen to wise people in our lives who might see things that we don't see about ourselves, gifts and abilities as well as weaknesses. And also go where we're literally called by someone else, because passion is what we feel inside, but calling, as you've already said, it comes from God, it comes from outside ourselves. And sometimes we just get called, someone has a need and we can fill that need, whether we are passionate about it or
Mhm.
not. And the research that I cite in the book shows that it goes back to that longevity. They have done, Cal Newport has done extensive research to show that people who have done a job for a long time and become good at it and competent at it end up, lo and behold, becoming passionate about it.
Hmm.
How ironic.
So, yeah, yeah, yeah. And they feel like they're doing something of purpose because they've been doing it a long time and they are good at it, and it becomes their passion after a long time.
That's really incredible. I think of, going with writing for a second, and I'm probably talking to the wrong person about this because you are such a gifted writer. But like, if somebody's like me and they're like, oh, I share that passion for writing. The, I mean, Mark Batterson says this, the amount of full-time authors, like people who can actually live off of full-time writing is such a small,
Right.
microscopic percentage but that doesn't mean that there aren't great authors or
Right.
writers or people who get discovered after their time or, you know, great books, but they're a pastor and an author, or just, it could be. So I think 2025 might be the year, the decade of like multi passions, multi possibilities
Mhm.
of like
Yes.
fractional gigs, explore your passions, all of that. But if we get too hung up, what I hear you saying is if we get too hung up on my income has to come solely from my passions,
Mhm.
I wonder if maybe that isn't where a lot of frustration comes from.
Totally.
That's
So good.
exactly it. It's a cultivated, created frustration that isn't necessary. And it's not the fault of the people who experience it. It's the fault of, the kind of the culture around us that's building up wrong expectations. I mean, and I do talk about this in the book, think of generations past
Yeah.
of people who had to, they had to work in coal mines, or they had to work in a
Hmm.
factory, or they had to till the land. That wasn't what they didn't set out to do that because they were passionate about it. They set out to do it because this is how, to put a roof over their heads and over the heads of their family. Now, again, I'm very thankful that I'm not doing that. And if we don't have to work in a coal mine, and because we're not good at that, I'm not saying we must do that, but we have to put it all into perspective and realize that most people don't get a chance to get an income from doing what they are most passionate about. If we do, wonderful, and be thankful for that, but realize that there are lots of ways to pursue these multiple passions, lots of ways to make a living and put a roof over our heads and be responsible. And some people actually would prefer not to have their job be the thing that they love. That's another thing to think about is, just like maybe you want to keep those things separate. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be a veterinarian because I loved animals. And then I decided, you know what? I love animals so much. I just want to enjoy them. I don't
Yep.
want to like cut them open on a surgery table and
Right.
stitch them up again. I just want to enjoy them. So I have a passion for them, but I don't make a living from them.
That's amazing. I think maybe the reason, if I could put my finger on one reason that we asked you, Karen, to be on the podcast today is I discovered you on the app that at the time was called Twitter, but X. And like if I could have your insight on this for every young leader, if they could approach social media the way that you do, with kindness, with respect, with a humility, with an engagement, with an approachability. Like we live in a day and age where a lot of people are battling and calling out or
Total.
canceling, or, a lot of people are getting rid of their accounts because of maybe it could be a
Mhm.
dark, toxic place at times. And I recognize that, but I think there's also a way to live that's using words to uplift and encourage and edify. And
Mhm.
that's something I certainly acknowledge you for and recognize from afar, and that I was very drawn in by. But do you have a strategy or what? Talk about your approach to apps like maybe Instagram or X or social media. And part of it is your writing is available there, but there's a thoughtfulness to engagement that I'm picking up on. Anything that maybe
Yeah,
you have
yeah.
insight to share for young leaders?
Yeah, I have a couple of points. I mean, one is that the first social media platform that I got on was Facebook way back in the day, in its early years of creation. And I was a young professor just starting out at the time, and I literally got on Facebook to make it sort of an extension of my classroom.
Wow.
I thought it was a great place to kind of post articles and have discussions, or if we talked about something in class that was super interesting, and I would post it on there and say, hey, we talked about, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales today, and it was really interesting. So I used Facebook as my classroom. And that was long before I knew, any of these other social media outlets would exist, or even before I knew I was going to be a writer. And so, but that beginning really has defined my posture from the beginning. It's
Mm.
kind of like, this is classroom. I'm providing space for others and myself to learn. I'm hosting discussions. I want to share information and knowledge. Now, we all know that things have gone south from there, especially on X. It is toxic. There are algorithms. There's a lot of money now to be made from the advertising and the way they drive the algorithms. So there's a lot of risk and danger there that wasn't there before. And so the second part of my answer is that I so far have stayed on there primarily because I actually do think it's a calling.
Wow.
I think I'm called to it. And because I think in some ways social media platforms, well, are like mission fields,
Hmm.
and not just evangelistic ones, but even discipleship ones to model what it looks like to be the things that you just described that I am, to be attentive and listening and generous, and sometimes, a sharp rebuke when needed. But it's also something that I think that I have a gift to do well, just because of my nature and my experience in the classroom. I don't take things personally. I can just sort of share things. I spend, in the classroom, I spend all day in front of people who are wrong, and I don't put them down for it. So I can do that on social media as well. But other people, it's like a Jekyll and Hyde situation. It's very challenging for many people. And, so I would say if it's a stumbling block in that way, or something that causes unrest or dissatisfaction or discontentment in you, then that may be something you're not called to be part of. And so I think that, again, for me, everything comes down to stewardship,
Hmm.
stewarding the opportunities and that God puts in front of us, the gifts we have, the responsibilities we have. And so social media is one of those things that we have to steward well.
I love that. The word that stood out to me, even just at the beginning of this, you're answering this question, was the word, this is the posture that I chose.
Wow.
And I think that that
Mhm.
posture that you chose is humbling. And I think a lot of people can't probably stay there, or they start there but they don't end there. So even just the posture that you chose, like I think that being a bright light in a dark place. And speaking of posture, when it comes to the posture of the American church in 2025, how would you describe the culture in America and Christianity, and what have you been seeing, whether it's across crosshairs, like what are you seeing in that regard?
Well, let's start
Is it a
with
loaded question?
the easy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would say, there's a lot that I could say about this. I'll try to keep it succinct. I'm old enough and have been around in the church long enough to have seen the way that the posture of the culture wars that I was, kind of raised in and came in of age in and participated in and been formed by, how that, for all the good that it did, has also borne some very bad fruit that we are seeing. There's a lot of bad fruit. I'll just pick a couple, but one is just sort of what it's done to ourselves, right? What it's done to the church, in the sense that there's a sense that I see among many, in my particular community within the church. I don't mean locally. I mean just my tradition, where we have fallen too much in love with power, and we've fallen too much in love with influence, and we've fallen too much in love with the idea that we can do these great big things for the Lord, and get paid to do it, or get notoriety for doing it, or get, big platforms for doing it. And certainly some people do those things. But that overall posture has, I think, has been bad for the church, and therefore, because it's bad for the church, has been bad for our surrounding culture. And so, when people see us as being corrupt or power hungry, or just wanting to exert force rather than win people over, there's some truth in that. I mean, it's not entirely true, but I think in general, sort of broad streaks, we see pendulum swings that go back and forth, and I think we're kind of in that pendulum swing now, where we have an opportunity to perhaps correct ourselves.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Wow. I think that it's really interesting what you said there. I'm processing it and I've observed plenty of things like that. And you know, there's this podcaster named Lewis Howes, and sometimes I like his stuff. He has something, I think he's called the School of Greatness, but he asks all of his guests, like, how do they define greatness? And what's amazing is Jesus actually answered that. He
Mm,
said, whoever wants to be great among you must be servant of all. And I think that applies to church leadership, young adulthood, purpose, calling, the posture, all of the things that are themes of our conversation today. Really, Jesus kind of talked about the humble posture. Philippians, Paul wrote about him like, he didn't consider equality with God something to lord over people or hold on to, but he kind of descended into greatness. And by serving, being a like here is the master, the guy with like the power and the authority, and he used it really to serve. And so that's where my mind went, Karen, of just like kind of self-reflection and introspective. And then for all of us, the followers of Christ, to ask and spur ourselves on and like,
mm,
hey, let's take the low approach. Let's be like Christ. He's who we're
Yeah.
following. And man, and to go almost back a second on the social media piece, you mentioned it could almost be like a mission field. And there's this study, I think it was Pine Tops Foundation, they put out the Great Opportunity Survey.
Mm.
And they asked the question like, what could the future church look like? I think they picked the year 2050. And there was like 8 different things that they found that if I think it was 20 million people were expected in Gen Z to leave the faith by 2050, but if they maybe course corrected, the number just would, if they planted more
Mm.
churches and 8 or so other things, there was like a massive decrease in
Mm.
reaching Gen Z. But one of the things that they talked about was, where is the digital evangelist, the digital missionary, the digital maybe Martin Luther, George Whitefield, or Billy Graham? And so to kind of come back to something that you had said that does tie into our conversation on the future of the church, where could or should maybe the church be in 5 years? Or what about even 25 years? It could be about serving, it could be about kind of a correction in authority or power. But what thoughts do you have on that?
Mm. Well, I really, again, I'm coming from a background where I spent so many years in the classroom teaching young evangelical students, and I have learned so much from them. It's, I'm not a parent, but I know parents say this, that, you look at your children and you see your sort of your own mistakes in them,
For
right? I
sure.
mean, if they, if you have a moment of anger or frustration, and then the next day you see your child reflecting that, as a very humbling experience. Well, in teaching evangelical students for so long, I've seen a lot of kind of the mistakes that we've made in contemporary church culture. And so as we watch these younger people deconstruct or disentangle, or all the
Mhm.
words that are used, as they are trying to distinguish between the true faith and just sort of the cultural trappings of it, that is that I think that is a gift for the church as we watch that. Now, some of them are walking away from the faith, abandoning the faith, and that's not, that's not the pattern we want to follow, but their actual struggle to distinguish between what are the truths that are thousands of years old that Jesus came to embody and teach versus the 21st century American materialism and political
Right.
stuff that's gotten
Yeah.
all wrapped in.
Yeah.
Like we can participate in this disentangling of the culture from the faith so that it can be, it can better reflect what Jesus came to teach us and to show us. And so for me, I think that there's a lot of hope and a lot of possibility in just watching this process coming alongside those people who are struggling through it and helping them and helping ourselves to do this work of throwing out the bathwater, but not the baby with the bathwater, right? I mean, because that we're in this moment right now where because we've been the dominant sort of religion for you know a couple of centuries in America, we've accumulated a lot of things that don't go along with it, and now is a time to kind of clean house.
Yeah, I think when we come alongside a lot of young adults, is there what we're seeing is not even so much deconstructed and deconstruction happening more, but it's like they're recognizing the church hurts, the things that they've stepped into
Mm,
the church with that
mm,
maybe the a person in the church said or something happened or they were
mm,
uninvited or there was some miscommunication. I mean, fill in the blank. There's a plethora of
mm,
things when it comes to church hurt. But realizing that if we can overcome forms of church hurt and we can forgive, that there is freedom, because the only person that we're
mm,
holding captive is ourself and our calling, and
mm,
to ultimately live a joyful life for the Lord on this side of eternity. So, what do you wish that you could tell every pastor about church hurt, whether they're in a
mm,
form of authority and they have influence? Because every word has weight
Yeah.
when it comes to
mm.
leadership, but specifically in the pastoral world, like what would you tell every pastor when it comes to the topic of church hurt? Um, yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I would say, that when it comes to any kind of hurt, I mean, this is true in our own relationships and friendships as well, that it's not our perception of whether something should have hurt or should not have hurt, right? It's if someone feels hurt by something, that needs to be acknowledged and dealt with, regardless of whether we think, it was something, if it would have hurt us or what our intentions were. If we don't do that in our own relationships, if someone is hurt because when we just ignore it and say, well, that shouldn't have hurt you, that relationship's not going to last very long, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or be very
Yeah.
healthy. Well, that's the same in church hurt. Because oftentimes hurt isn't just about that very thing. It's about what happened before. If someone has a broken arm and then you just kind of, tap them a little, go like this to them, it's going to hurt much
Mhm.
more than the person whose arm is not broken, right?
Yep.
And
Hmm.
so that sort of very subjective experience of hurt is actually very objectively real, and should not be diminished. But we have to acknowledge and listen and hear, and then show the way forward, for how to let that hurt heal. And that cannot be done on demand or on anyone's timeline. And just like any other kind of healing, it's a process and it can take longer for some people. And we just have to live with that hurt and help it to heal as long as that takes.
Hmm.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, there's so much there on the other group of people that might be listening, might have, and I think that you acknowledge something that it's so real,
Hmm.
and it's not just in church, it's in just about every relationship. It's like, I think the people who can bring you the most joy and cause you the most pain is the ones that you love most.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so, especially, okay, if your relatives or your family or your friends or your spiritual leaders or, community, these are all places where it's like, if you wanted to be, how lonely it would be to just be in a bubble and not ever let anyone in. But then sometimes it's like you do get hurt and you do kind of more hunker down. But how would you encourage maybe the young adult or young leader who has experienced some pain, hurt. Maybe they're thinking about walking away, thinking about deconstructing. What would you say to them today?
I like to go back to words and definitions, and I do think it's helpful and healthy to distinguish between different kinds of things. So almost anything that can happen to us that might be wrong or betrayal or unjust is going to hurt. But then there are other things that come with that. Sometimes we have to distinguish, is it just it hurt my feelings, or is there something else that was wrong or unjust or some other sin, and sort of separate those things out so that because they all have to be dealt with separately. Like our own hurt is separate from dealing with, some kind of wrong that has been done that needs to be addressed in a godly way. And so if we can distinguish those things and deal with each one, then it can help ourselves, but it also can help, maybe those systems or communities that where those things happened, or maybe not. We are in another place in our culture where institutions are powerful and influential, and they didn't get that way accidentally, and so there are going to be times and places where people choose institutions and connections and networks over what is right. And so if that's what has happened, that doesn't mean everyone is like that. And so we can look for healthier communities and look for people who will listen and will deal with those things. And they are everywhere. It's not just the church.
Right.
Any place in the world that has institutions and families and relationships are going to have those places too. But we just have to understand as believers that we have different ways. We have ways that we are supposed to address these things in others and in ourselves. And that's a responsibility we have to steward as well.
Hmm.
I'm reminded of college, North Central University. And I had a professor named Dr. David Watson, and every time I took a few of his classes, I think Micah did as well. And every class, he would start by saying three sentences. People will, and then you were supposed to respond, fail you. So people will fail you. Organizations will guard their territory, but God is faithful.
Hmm.
And if you're
I
going to
love
like a
that.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, you kind of know what he's
Mhm.
saying. But then for me, at least, I got out in the real world and got some hurts, hurdles, hang-ups, bumps, bruises. And then I had this epiphany one day. I was like, oh,
That's what he meant.
oh. So
What-
like that was a nice way to start class. And like, I get it. It was a mantra or whatever. But then a couple years, life happens and you're like, this is what Dr.
It's
Watson was
actually
like.
true.
It's like, this is what he was
I,
talking about. This is what he was trying to say. And I don't know. I think that sometimes God in his grace and kindness gives us maybe like a little bit of advance warning. Like, I mean, even p- uh, the hot take that Jesus gave of like, in this world, you're going to have troubles, but take heart. I'm going to overcome the world. Like, there's some warnings and there's some encouragement. There's going to be some conflict. Life is going to be challenging and hard, and that's part of what makes it exciting at times and nerve-wracking and scary, all the feels. But I go back to that moment in college and then afterwards, and I feel like there's spiritual maturity is the unveiling of, whoa, those three things. People will fail us. Reality. Organizations will guard their territory. Like, oh, okay. It's like setting realistic expectations. And then that third piece of God and his faithfulness, the spiritual maturity, at least, like, I want our listener to lift their eyes and recognize that, yes, people will fail us. Organizations, institutions, they are powerful, influential to your point, Karen. And then we have a recognition that God is faithful, even in the failing of
Hmm.
people, even when people we trust, love, admire, maybe put on a pedestal, they fail us. It's like, whoa, I didn't expect that. I wasn't anticipating that. Or maybe there was hurt that involved an institution. I'm not going to belittle it or minimize it, but recognizing God's glory, greatness, faithfulness through it all.
Hmm.
Um, that's just what I'm reminded of today.
That's good.
Well, I think there's a whole mission statement in what you just said, and it's like it's actually something that I think people should take and heed and replicate. And you just said three words that are really important. And I think this could be one of the most important things that we do in all this. And you said it, set realistic expectations.
That's good.
That is a ministry in itself.
That's good.
I did that was one of those moments where I was like, well, what did
You
I
did
say?
that. Yeah.
What did I
Yeah,
say?
that's what you said.
Ethan?
Yeah, set realistic. And
Oh,
that means we have to have an understanding of what reality is, right? This isn't an easy thing. And reality, for good and bad. And that's what your professor did. And that's how I think we can serve any people that we are ministering to, is to set realistic expectations. And I don't mean just the pessimistic stuff, but I mean even the optimistic stuff. But
yeah,
yeah.
that's so good. Well, we have some expectations for you, Miss Karen, in regards
Uh-oh.
to the 5 and 5. So we have
Okay.
5 minutes on the clock. There's 5 fun questions. I hope you enjoy them. Are you ready for the challenge?
I don't know if I'm ready, but we'll find out, I guess.
You've been doing
Okay.
awesome thus far. I think you'll be just fine.
I'm loving
Okay.
this
I am
conversation.
too.
Yeah.
Okay, but here's question number 1, Karen. What is your dream in a sentence?
My dream is to sit around and read books all day and write about them.
And you're doing
That's
that,
my
aren't
dream.
you?
Well, yeah. I am mostly. I'm doing that and other things, but yeah.
Love it.
Well, I noticed in the prep for this, one of the books that you have written, I believe it's like on reading well.
Yeah.
And I mean, especially even through the lens of like young adults or young leaders, it could be, of course, we're going to link in the show notes your newest book about calling and vocation. Excited for us and the listener to get that. But a few of your favorite book recommendations.
Oh wow, yeah. So I do love classic novels. So probably my all-time favorite one is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I love Charles Dickens, and my favorite Dickens novel is Great Expectations. Yeah, a lot of 19th century literature. I recently, in the past few years, I read a very short novella. It's just become a movie. I haven't seen it yet. It's probably now on my top 5 lists of all books, which is a lot. And it's Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These, I think it's called. I can't even remember the title. Small Things Like These. Beautiful. It's just a stunning story that is just shows what it means to be a Christian, really, even though it's
Wow.
not an overtly Christian book.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so those are probably one of the most influential nonfiction books that I've ever read. This was going back many years, but it's really just shaped my thinking over the years, is Neil Postman's Ourselves to Death, which is about, media culture and how it forms and shapes us. So that's one I highly recommend for anyone who hasn't read it. And, whether college student age or ministry leader, for sure should read this book if they haven't read it.
Wow.
Oh, that's good. All right. Here's question number 3. Here's the curveball. If you could ask Josiah and myself any question under the sun, what would you want to know today?
Know how you met.
Ooh, how did we meet? Well, my version of the story is back in 2024. I went to bed and I said, Lord, if
2014.
2014, oh my gosh.
It's
Last
like,
year.
I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
you're newlyweds.
2014,
Okay.
2014, almost 11 years ago. I went to bed one night and I was like, Lord, if my husband's not where I'm living, bring me to him. Like, just bring me to him, like wherever you want me to go, whatever you want me to do. And I saw a vision of Josiah, which I did not know, downtown Minneapolis, which I did not know. I told the Lord I was never going to go to school at North Central University. I was never going to move downtown. I was never going to date or marry anybody younger than me. And all 3 of those things happened thus far. Everything was completed. But I went to North Central the fall of 2014, met Josiah a couple months into it, and I stepped foot in the church where he was on staff, shook his hand. It was the guy from my dream. The city that I was living in was literally 1.5 miles from my house where I live, the bridge where I saw Josiah's face. And I shook his hand and God said, yep. So in that moment, I had to be mindful, like, I do not want to have a Joseph moment, meaning when Joseph had his dream about his brothers bowing down to him as the wheat in the field and all that, I was like, I cannot say anything. Like, these are cards I'm holding close to my heart because I've been praying and fasting for a spouse.
And you don't want to
So
scare them away or
did
anything.
not. If
Like,
anybody does say that, you run the other way. God told me I'm
yeah.
going to marry you. I had a dream about you. So actually what happened out of that was God told me, I felt he impressed upon my heart. And when I had the dream was your spouse is not going to believe the story. So start journaling. So I started journaling to Josiah, not knowing who he was, never had a name, face, only a face. And I turned it into a journal now that brings Christ back into the center of singleness, that points young adults to the Word of God, to praying, fasting, and then journaling to your future spouse. And then you give that leather-bound journal to your spouse on your wedding night of all your prayers, all your reflections throughout the past years or however long they've been journaling. So that was my version of the story of how our lives intersected.
Josiah. I, I
I
just
can't.
hope that the expectations in the journal were realistic.
Hey, I can't top that. She told the story beautifully. I just remember all of it and meeting Micah and becoming friends. We were in the same young adult ministry, and for like a year, 10 months, we were friends. And then it was like one of those moments. I had a rule. It wasn't the church's rule or the pastor's rule. I was just like, if I'm the young adult pastor here, I'm not going to be dating the young adults. But then I had this epiphany. I'm like, well, she's not even from this state
You
or
found
this
the
church.
loophole.
So yeah, and then we started dating, dated a year. We were engaged 3 months, and
Mhm.
um definitely like, Micah, you're one of God's gifts, and it's a fun journey, and that
Mhm.
journal, like, that's not only impacted my life, but I think a lot of young adults who then get to, kind of make their own, let God be the author of their own story, and
Mhm.
document it and gift it in the process too. But
Yeah.
that's a fun topic and question.
Ask that question. Yeah, that's a fun story.
Karen,
Amazing.
if there's one place that you could travel that you haven't been yet, and you could bring your husband, like, where would you guys go, and what snack or beverage would you guys bring?
Ooh.
Could be road trip, could be flight.
I think, yeah. I think I would like to go to Scotland and for snacks. I don't know. Or Italy. I don't know, and go to Italy and eat pizza, go to Scotland, and I don't know what they make in Scotland, but I'm sure it's good.
It sounds delicious.
Views are enough. The views are enough, right? Oh my goodness. Too fun. Okay, final question. If you could leave the listener with one piece of encouragement today, what would you want to leave them with?
I would want to leave them with the encouragement that not only does God have a calling on your life, He actually has multiple callings. You will fulfill many callings over your life, some at the same time, some at different times. And you just have to be patient, and let Him call and be listening for it. It will happen.
Amen. It's so good.
Man, want to double down on that encouragement, especially if you have been wrestling with a lot of doubt or frustration or disappointment or
Mhm.
discouragement, and kind of like, I don't know, I think sometimes the culture place a lot of expectations on young people. You have to grow up yesterday and tell us your life plans before, like,
Mm.
back to the realistic expectations part. It's just like, man, give God time and
Mhm.
discover. It's a beautiful journey. And I just feel encouraged by the reminder you just gave for us, for the listener, that there's going to be different jerseys that you wear. There's going to be different assignments and teams that you play for, so to speak. But it is going to be a fun adventure, so buckle up. But Karen, thank you
Mhm.
so much for that encouragement and this conversation.
Thank you for having me.